The journey to Fjordhaven was as desolate as I had anticipated. The carriage rattled through the frozen countryside, flanked by frostbitten trees that stood like sentinels guarding secrets I dared not uncover. Snow muffled the sound of the horses' hooves, leaving the silence to hum with a tension I couldn't place. The village, nestled in the valley below, appeared suddenly, its flickering lights struggling to pierce the twilight haze. I'd come here not by chance, but by necessity, summoned by a terse letter from an estranged cousin, Anya. The ink on the parchment had bled slightly, as if hurried hands had scrawled it in haste. Fjordhaven needs you, Ingrid. The old stories are returning. I was no stranger to my family's proclivity for superstition, but something in her words clung to me like the cold air biting my cheeks. Anya had always been prone to dramatics, yet her desperation felt different this time. When I arrived at her cottage, the scene was unsettling. A single candle flickered in the window, casting long shadows across the frost-laden ground. Anya opened the door before I could knock, her face pale and drawn, her eyes darting to the darkened street behind me. "You came," she breathed, clutching the doorframe for support. "Of course. Your letter." "Shoo." She cut me off, pulling me inside and bolting the door. The cottage was warm, but not comforting. It felt as though something unseen lingered just beyond the firelight. I dropped my bag onto the floor, my boots crunching against a scatter of pine needles. "Anya, what's this about?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she paced to the window, peering out as if expecting someone, or something. Finally, she spoke, her voice strained. "Have you ever heard the tale of the Midnight Sleigh?" I frowned, shaking my head. "It's not something they tell in Oslo. It's an old story, local to Fjordhaven," she said, wringing her hands. "A sleigh that glides across the sky on Christmas Eve. Not a merry sleigh, Ingrid, but a cursed one. They say it comes for those who have forgotten." "Forgotten what?" She hesitated, as if weighing the risk of saying it aloud. "The spirit of the season. Those who have turned cold to the joys of Christmas, kindness, love, community." I suppressed a sigh, suspecting this was another of Anya's wild tales. But before I could dismiss her, she leaned closer, her voice low. "It's not a fable, Ingrid. Last year, old Lars disappeared on Christmas Eve. They found his coat, his boots, everything but him. The year before that, a young woman vanished. Some say they were taken by the sleigh." A chill crept up my spine, though I tried to mask it. "Anya, it's just a story to keep children in line. Nothing more." Her eyes met mine, filled with an intensity one hadn't seen before. "Then why does it always come to Fjordhaven? Why do the bells ring in the church tower, even when no one is there to pull the ropes?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the sound of distant chimes interrupted me. My breath hitched as the haunting melody drifted through the icy air. Anya froze, her face a mask of terror. "It's starting," she whispered. The chimes lingered in the night air, each note a mournful echo that seemed to twist itself into the marrow of my bones. Anya stood rooted by the window, her breath fogging the glass as her gaze darted toward the empty street. The sound came not from the village square, but from the hills beyond, where the chapel stood abandoned for decades. "What do you mean, it's starting?" I asked, the urgency in my voice surprising even myself. Anya turned to me, her expression taut with fear. "The bells ring every year on this night. It means the sleigh is near. Anya, this is madness. Bells don't ring themselves." A sharp knock at the door cut me off, the sound reverberating through the cottage like a gunshot. Anya let out a gasp, clutching her chest as if her heart might leap free of its cage. "Who would come at this hour?" I asked, stepping toward the door. No. Anya hissed, grabbing my arm. Her fingers were cold and unyielding. Don't open it. Not tonight. I hesitated, torn between reason and her palpable terror. The knock came again, more insistent this time, and I felt a surge of defiance. I wasn't about to cower in fear of an old wives' tale. Ignoring her protests, I unbolted the door and swung it open. No one stood on the threshold. Instead, the snow outside was unmarked, pristine as if no living soul had passed. Yet there, resting in the center of the porch, was a single sprig of holly, its red berries vivid against the frost. Anya's breath hitched behind me. "It's a warning," she whispered. Before I could respond, the bells tolled again, louder now, their rhythm like a heartbeat pounding against the stillness of the night. A cold wind swept through the open door, extinguishing the fire in the hearth. The sudden darkness left us in a void of silence, broken only by the distant sound of sleigh bells, soft, yet unmistakable. I stepped back inside, slamming the door shut and bolting it once more. My pulse quickened as Anya grabbed my wrist, her grip trembling. "You shouldn't have opened it. Now it knows you're here." "What it?" I demanded, my frustration mounting. She didn't answer. Instead, she crossed the room to a small cupboard, her movements hurried and frantic. From within, she retrieved a bundle of candles and lit them with trembling hands. Their flickering light cast long, wavering shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Anya's voice was tight, her words clipped. "The sleigh doesn't just take the disbelievers. It takes anyone foolish enough to invite it in." "This is absurd," I snapped, though I could feel the fragile thread of my skepticism beginning to fray. "A sleigh isn't some malevolent force. It's a..." The sound of hooves cut through my words, faint but steady, as though approaching from the far end of the village. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, and accompanied by the soft jingle of bells. Anya froze, her eyes wide with dread. "You hear it now, don't you?" she whispered. I couldn't deny it. The sound was unmistakable, and it was growing louder. Against my better judgment, I crept to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to peer outside. At first, I saw nothing but the snow, illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. But then, emerging from the shadows, a shape appeared at the end of the lane, a black sleigh gliding silently across the frozen ground. No horses pulled it. It moved as if by its own will, the figure seated atop it cloaked in darkness. I let the curtain fall and stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's real," I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. Anya's face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. "It's always real, Ingrid. Every year, it comes for someone. And what happens if it does?" Her answer was barely audible. "They never return." The bells outside grew deafening, as though the sleigh were drawing closer to the cottage. The air felt thick with dread, pressing down on me like a weight. Suddenly, the candles sputtered and went out, plunging the room into darkness once more. Anya let out a sharp cry, and I stumbled toward her, groping for her hand. But before I could reach her, the sound of the sleigh bells stopped abruptly, leaving a silence more oppressive than the noise. It was then that the knock came again, louder and more forceful, shaking the door on its hinges. The knock reverberated through the cottage, its cadence like the tolling of a death knell. Anya clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and whispered hoarsely, "Don't open it. No matter what you hear, do not open that door." The certainty in her voice sent a shiver through me. I wanted to believe it was a cruel prank or the overactive imaginations of a village steeped in superstition, but the unease that coiled in my chest told me otherwise. "Who's there?" I called, my voice steadier than I felt. There was no response. Only the silence of the snow-laden night greeted me. Yet I couldn't shake the sensation that someone, or something, stood just beyond the wooden barrier, waiting. Another knock, more insistent this time, rattled the door on its hinges. I felt Anya's grip tighten, her trembling hand pulling me back as if physical distance from the door could shield us from whatever sought entry. "Ingrid," she murmured, her voice trembling. "It doesn't need you to let it in. It's already here." I turned to her, startled. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, the knocking ceased, replaced by the soft creak of wood. My breath hitched as I saw the latch on the door begin to turn, slowly, deliberately, as though guided by an unseen hand. "No," Anya whispered, her voice trembling with despair. "It can't come in unless..." The latch clicked, and the door swung open, revealing the black expanse of the night beyond. Snow swirled in the air, but the porch remained eerily untouched, as though no storm had passed. And there, standing just beyond the threshold, was the sleigh. It was larger than it had appeared from the window, its body crafted from dark, weathered wood that seemed to drink in the light. The bells along its edges glinted like fragments of ice, and a thin mist clung to its runners. But it was the figure seated atop it that held me transfixed. The driver was shrouded in a tattered cloak, its edges frayed and moving unnaturally, as if caught in a breeze that didn't exist. A hood obscured the figure's face, but I could feel its gaze fixed on me, a piercing, invisible weight that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. "Ingrid," the figure rasped, its voice low and resonant, like the groan of ancient wood. "You've been chosen." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding as the words registered. "Chosen for what?" I demanded, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "For the journey," it replied simply, as if that explained everything. Anya dropped to her knees beside me, her hands clasped in silent prayer. Her lips moved soundlessly, her eyes squeezed shut as though she could will the specter away through sheer faith. "Leave us alone," I said, trying to muster authority in my voice. "We want nothing to do with you." The figure tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion that felt almost mocking. "You invited me," it said. The holly on the porch, the cursed sprig that had been left as a warning, flashed in my mind. I had opened the door. The figure raised a gloved hand and pointed toward the sky. "Look." Against my better judgment, I stepped forward and peered out into the night. The heavens were alive with motion, streaks of light crossing the black expanse like falling stars. But as I watched, I realized they were not stars at all, they were other sleighs, dozens of them, crisscrossing the sky with spectral precision. Each one carried a shadowy figure, and from each emanated the same haunting chime of bells. They moved as if on a dark hunt, their purpose unknown but unmistakably grim. I stumbled back into the cottage, slamming the door shut and bolting it with trembling hands. "What do you want from me?" I cried, turning to face the specter. But the figure was gone. Only the sleigh remained, silent and motionless on the porch. The bells no longer jingled, the night had fallen into an oppressive, suffocating quiet. Anya's voice broke the silence. "It always starts with the holly. The ones who touch it," she paused, her voice catching. "They're marked." Panic surged through me as her words sank in. I had touched the holly. I had brought this upon myself. The sleigh's bells jingled softly, a sound that seemed to come from within the room now, rather than outside. I spun around, searching for the source, but the flickering shadows from the candles made it impossible to discern what was real and what was illusion. "Ingrid," Anya said, her voice trembling. "It's not done with you yet." The sound of the bells was maddening. They were faint at first, barely audible over the crackle of the fire, but their rhythm grew sharper, louder, more insistent. It was as if they had burrowed into my mind, each chime echoing through the chambers of my skull. Anya stood motionless by the window, her pale face turned toward the black expanse outside. The sleigh was still there, its presence a malevolent shadow on the porch. Its dark wood gleamed with a sheen that was not of this world, and the mist that clung to its runners seemed to snake toward the threshold, inching closer with each passing moment. "We mustn't let it in," Anya whispered, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. "Whatever it wants, we cannot let it take you." The thought of being taken sent a cold shiver down my spine. Yet as I stood there, transfixed by the sight of that ghostly sleigh, something in me shifted. A strange pull, a compulsion, began to gnaw at the edges of my resolve. The bells were calling me, their melody both haunting and hypnotic. I shook my head, trying to rid myself of the sensation. Why does it come for people who've lost the spirit of Christmas? I asked, though I wasn't sure if I was addressing Anya or the night itself. Why me? Anya turned to face me, her eyes dark and shadowed. It doesn't come for everyone. Only those who, she hesitated, as if weighing the burden of her words. Only those who carry regrets. You brought the holly into your home, Ingrid. And now it knows your sorrow. My sorrow. The weight of it pressed down on me, memories flooding my mind unbidden, Christmases spent alone, bitter arguments with family, the ache of loss I had buried deep inside. Was it truly my grief that had summoned this horror? The sleigh bells rang louder, their metallic resonance cutting through the oppressive silence. The mist at the door seemed almost alive now, curling and twisting like spectral fingers. Anya darted toward me, her face frantic. "It's testing you," she hissed, her voice urgent. "If you give in, it will claim you. You must resist." But resist what? I opened my mouth to ask, but the words caught in my throat. The room had grown unbearably still. The flickering light of the fire dimmed, and the air seemed to thicken, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Then, a new sound joined the bells. It was faint, distant, a child's laughter. The sound was sharp and brittle, like the cracking of ice, and it sent a bolt of terror through me. "Do you hear that?" I asked, clutching Anya's arm. She nodded, her expression grim. "It's a trick. Do not listen." But the laughter grew louder, closer. And with it came voices, familiar voices. My mother's soft lullaby, my father's warm chuckle, the harmonious clamor of a family gathering long past. The memories were so vivid, so achingly real, that tears welled in my eyes. "Ingrid," a voice called from outside. It was my mother's voice, tender and inviting. "Come to us, darling. We've missed you so much." My knees buckled, and I staggered toward the door. It was impossible, it had to be, but the sound of her voice pulled at me with an almost physical force. Anya grabbed my shoulders, shaking me violently. "No," she cried. "It's not real. Whatever you think you're hearing, it's a lie." But I could barely hear her over the clamor of voices. They surrounded me, filling the room, calling my name with a haunting familiarity. My mother, my father, my friends, all the people I had pushed away or lost, were out there, just beyond the door. The latch began to rattle again, though this time, it wasn't from the outside. My own hand, trembling and unsteady, had reached for it. "Ingrid." Anya's voice was sharp, cutting through the fog of my thoughts. "If you open that door, you'll never come back." I froze, my hand inches from the latch. The voices outside faltered, replaced by a low, guttural growl that sent a wave of nausea through me. I pulled my hand back, stumbling away from the door. The growl intensified, and the sleigh outside began to move. Its bells rang in a furious, discordant rhythm as the mist swirled around it, enveloping it in an impenetrable shroud. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. I sank to the floor, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. Anya knelt beside me, her face pale but resolute. "It will come again," she said softly. "Until you face it. Until you make peace with what it knows." The hours after the sleigh vanished were suffocatingly silent. Anya and I spoke little, each trapped in the web of our own thoughts. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in an eerie quiet, as if nature itself conspired to conceal what had transpired. I sat by the fire, but its warmth did little to thaw the icy dread in my chest. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside made me flinch. Anya paced the room, her lips moving soundlessly as though reciting a prayer. She wouldn't explain further what she meant by making peace or what the sleigh truly sought. All I knew was that it would return, and next time, I might not resist its pull. When the bells rang again, they were closer. Louder. Anya froze mid-step, her eyes locking on mine. "Don't move," she mouthed. But it was too late. The front door groaned as if under tremendous pressure, and the air filled with the sharp crack of ice splintering. The mist returned, creeping through the gaps in the doorframe, tendrils of frost racing across the wooden floor. And then, with a deafening crash, the door burst open. The sleigh stood there, its spectral horses pawing at the ground, their hooves leaving trails of glowing frost. The driver was a shadow, his figure swathed in flowing black that seemed to writhe like smoke. His head turned toward me, though no face was visible beneath the hood. Only darkness. "Ingrid!" Anya shouted, but her voice was drowned out by the sleigh bell's deafening toll. Before I could react, the mist surged toward me, wrapping around my legs like icy chains. It pulled, dragging me toward the open door. My screams tore through the night as I clawed at the floor, the frost biting into my skin. "Ingrid, fight it!" Anya yelled, darting toward me. She grabbed my arm, her grip strong, but the force pulling me was stronger. The sleigh bells rang in a frantic rhythm, and for a moment, I thought I heard laughter beneath their chime, a cruel, mocking sound that chilled me to the core. The driver raised an arm, pointing toward me, and the mist surged forward, enveloping me entirely. The world spun. The warmth of the house vanished, replaced by a bone-deep cold that stole the breath from my lungs. I was no longer on the floor, but in the sleigh itself, its seat hard and unforgiving beneath me. The horses reared, their glowing eyes fixed on the horizon, and then we were moving. The sleigh hurtled forward, faster than any earthly vehicle, the landscape around us a blur of white and black. The bells clanged with every jolt, their sound grating and relentless. I tried to scream, but the wind stole my voice, freezing the words in my throat. Ahead, the stars seemed to twist and shimmer, forming shapes I couldn't comprehend. The driver turned to me, his hooded head tilting in silent mockery. "What do you want from me?" I managed to choke out, though my voice was barely audible over the wind. The driver did not answer, but the sleigh slowed, and the mist around us thickened, coalescing into vague, shadowy forms. Faces began to emerge from the fog, pale, hollow-eyed figures that stared at me with a haunting intensity. I recognized them. Every one of them. My mother, her expression sorrowful. My father, his eyes filled with disappointment. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers I had wronged or abandoned, they all floated around me, their faces a tableau of regret and accusation. The driver extended a skeletal hand, pointing to the mist. The meaning was clear. These were my failures, my sins, my burdens. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This isn't real. You're not real." But the figures grew closer, their eyes boring into me, their mouths moving silently as if pleading for something I could not give. The sleigh came to a halt, and the driver gestured again, this time toward the ground. I looked down and saw a void, a chasm of darkness that seemed to stretch into infinity. The edges of the sleigh crumbled away, leaving me perched precariously on the edge. The driver's meaning was clear: jump or be pulled. The void yawned beneath me, an expanse so black it seemed to swallow even the pale light of the moon. I gripped the edge of the sleigh, my nails digging into the icy wood, frost biting into my skin. The figures in the mist swirled around me, whispering words I couldn't hear but could feel, heavy with reproach, disappointment, and sorrow. The driver raised his hand again, the motion slow and deliberate. I understood his intent. This was the final judgment, the weight of my failures pulling me to the abyss. The mist tightened around me, its cold touch an unbearable reminder of every moment I had chosen selfishness over kindness, isolation over connection. But then, over the howling wind and chiming bells, I heard something else. A voice. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Ingrid. It was Anya. Her voice pierced through the cacophony, grounding me, pulling me back. I turned, straining to see through the swirling mist, and there she was, a lone figure standing on the snow-covered ground below, clutching something in her hands. It was the lantern from the cabin. Its flame burned bright, defying the spectral gloom, casting a warm, golden glow that cut through the shadows. Anya raised it high, her voice steady and commanding. Ingrid, you don't belong to him. Fight. The driver turned his hooded head toward her, his form rippling as if disturbed by her presence. The horses reared, their glowing eyes flickering uncertainly. For the first time, I saw hesitation in the driver's movements, his skeletal hand lowering slightly. The figures in the mist faltered, their forms wavering, their accusatory stares softening. My mother's face, once twisted in sorrow, now looked at me with something else: hope. I won't jump, I said, my voice trembling but resolute. I won't give you my soul. The driver let out a low, guttural sound, neither human nor animal, a noise of pure rage. The mist surged forward, enveloping me completely, its icy grip tightening. But this time, I fought back. I thought of Anya, of her bravery in facing this horror with nothing but a lantern and her faith in me. I thought of the warmth of the fire in her cabin, the stories she had shared of her family, the simple joys of a life lived with love and connection. No more, I whispered. With all the strength I could muster, I reached out toward the lantern's glow. The light seemed impossibly far, but I focused on it, willing myself toward it. The mist screamed, the sleigh trembled, and the driver raised his hand once more, but it was too late. The lantern's light enveloped me, flooding the sleigh with its golden glow. The mist recoiled, shrieking as it dissolved into nothingness. The horses vanished, their spectral forms breaking apart like shards of ice. The sleigh itself began to crumble, its wood splintering and falling away, leaving me suspended in the air. And then, with a final, deafening crash, the sleigh disintegrated entirely, and I fell. The snow cushioned my landing, its cold sting a sharp contrast to the suffocating mist. I gasped for air, my lungs burning, my body trembling. Anya was beside me in an instant, her arms wrapping around me, pulling me close. "It's over," she whispered. "You're safe." I turned my head, looking back toward the sky where the sleigh had been. The stars shone bright and clear, unbroken by shadows or specters. The night was silent once more, save for the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. Anya helped me to my feet, her grip steady. "You saw them, didn't you? The ones you thought you'd lost?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. They weren't angry. They were waiting. "For you to forgive yourself," Anya said softly. "The sleigh feeds on guilt and regret, but it has no power over those who find peace within." As we made our way back to the cabin, the weight on my chest began to lift. The warmth of the fire greeted us, and for the first time in years, I felt its heat truly reach me. That Christmas morning, as the sun rose over the frozen landscape, I stood at the window, the light casting long shadows over the snow. The sleigh had not returned, its bells silenced for another year. But its lesson remained. In the heart of the Norwegian wilderness, I found a truth I had long ignored, the power of redemption, of connection, and of letting go. And though the sleigh may ride again for others, I knew it would not come for me. Not anymore.